All right, so hi, I'm Scott Menter. Over there's Joby. I work for him. He works for BPLogix. Actually, he is BPLogix. I'm just a mere helper. There. Today we're going to talk about sort of translating business or application semantics into business semantics, right? So it's funny, I ended up using the same terms as Neil a little bit because, we're both geniuses. So transactional, the transactional layer is exactly what you think, and more or less what I think Neil was saying. It's a lot of us think we're kind of the, do this thing, assign this task, put in this logic. It's the logic layer. The low-level business layer is I have a task, right? This is where your process actors live, right? All I know is I have to sign off this thing, and after me it goes to this other person maybe or something. Maybe I don't know that, but I know very little. But really what we're not that good at yet, I think in general, is this kind of high-level, goal-driven, how am I doing from a business standpoint overall? There's a reason we're not that good at it, right? So because it's hard to figure out, right? So for me to take a case, I'm going to talk about case a lot today. Let me take a case and say the status of this case is X, when in fact, boom, okay. When in fact all of the milestones and the things that make that status, right? Because that's a high-level thing. That's a human semantic thing. Those may be everywhere, right? They're just asynchronous. They're disparate across your system. Some of them are happening, by themselves. Some of them are user-caused, like whatever it is. So number one, they're hard to determine. Number two, if you think about it, those are the things that you really want to use to drive decisioning in your application. You want to use the business meaning of what's going on, even if it's a little bit hard to evaluate, right? I want to know what state this case is in now before I decide what to do next. And if I can't determine that state easily because I haven't translated from my transactions to that kind of semantic, higher level semantic, I'm not going to get that out of it. A little refresher on process timeline, just because you'll see a little bit of it later. The thing about process timeline, right? There's no token. It's not BPMN. There's no flow charts. It's a bunch of things that can be running all at the same time, right? So just think of it as purely event-driven, time-driven, whatever. And the thing is that means that in a given process, and now we're just talking about process more than case, anything that can be running right now is running right now, which is really useful for efficiency, a little more difficult in terms of gathering the semantic meaning that I was talking about a minute ago. So we created these app events. I know these go by fast, man. These app events, and the app events are to capture that transactional data, turn it into events with semantic meaning, combine those to create milestones, right, which are just sort of broader events, and then use those to actually drive the behavior of the application, right? So it's no longer, oh, this guy submitted, this form, and then the next thing, that's logic for the next thing. Now I'm really using knowledge of of the business side. I'm using the semantic knowledge of the business to drive these things. So here's an example. A transaction layer, you might attach a document, but it may be that as a business event, that's like, oh yeah, this was the document we needed, or that task completed means that this phase is completed, right? And once those things are combined, once I can put those things together, then I really know, my son just applied to law school, so you see a lot of examples like this. Then I really know what state is the world in, right? What state is the world in? And then once I know that, I might combine that with other things. For example, my ML predictions, right? So we have this ML stuff, and it can do, the kind of statistical analyses we were talking about earlier, and that you're all familiar with. I can put those things together, and then, out of that, drive other kinds of behavior. There's a simple behavior. We'll show you a little more subtle ones later, like just start something, do something that I wasn't going to do otherwise. I might also just change things that are currently running, which is not something you see a lot, not something I've seen today. This is going to take too long to talk about. We're just going to show it to you, but journals are a way of looking at this data, slicing and dicing these app events in a way that's meaningful to the person viewing them, and creating this sort of area where people can collaborate on them. So takeaways are just these, right? And we're going to go, that semantic, that business layer isn't always obvious. It can be hard to pull out. The app events exist to do that, and then to turn around and take those and drive behavior with them, so that you're actually, now your whole application is really driven on sort of, think of it as business logic or business goals rather than just these little transactional things. And then the journals give us an opportunity to sort of look through that like as a log, which is nice, and also collaborate on it sort of as a center of conversation. So, God, I'm glad that part's over. So now what we'd like to do is we'd like to show you a little bit of this. And do you want to come up here with that? Is that easier?
No, I can probably do it right here.
Whatever's easier. I don't mind moving.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's easier. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat, and you're probably not capturing me in the shot anymore, but
they'll hear you.
I'm okay with that. So what we're going to do today is, so this is the example that I was talking about earlier. You know, we're looking at an admissions office, right? And at a law school or a university. I happen to be really familiar with this process at the moment. And we're going to talk about, you know, how we turn, now this is a case-driven thing, we're going to talk about how we turn that into something that, you know, sort of more meaningful for the people using it and makes more sense to them above that transactional layer.
So where do you want to start? Do you want to start just, so kind of building
Let's show them building the app event.
Okay, so we'll just kind of start with the context. So as Scott was saying, the app events, think of those as a way to bring some kind of a business awareness to things. Everybody knows when we're all implementing processes, and we've all done it, we've all seen it, we understand the context of a step starting, a step completing, an activity, an event, something happening somewhere in the context of the case. So all of these things are happening independently. They're happening because of forms, other applications, different processes, but bringing those up to the level of the business, things that are more meaningful to a caseworker or an admissions officer, somebody that's looking at the case. So when we're looking at that, I'm going to start by, as an example, just taking a look at process timeline. Scott had mentioned this. This is just a typical example of a workflow process inside of Process Director, where these are all of the different activities that can occur, and there may be many of these as part of a particular case. So this just happens to be just an example, just a kind of a mock-up of the application process or completing the application process with all of the different activities that can be occurring, all of the different dependencies on those. One of the things that Scott had mentioned, which is really important, is the fact that these application events can be triggered based on things. So for example, this particular timeline has, let me just jump over here, can trigger application events that are going to give you that user context. So I might have an application event that says when this particular event occurs, and I might just say when some particular activity is completed within there, that means this to my users. You know, this is what it means. It means something was actually done, but now I can create the condition around that. This condition is not necessarily something the business is really thinking about. So this is not something they may be interested in or may actually even be aware of, but it might have a whole series of different conditions. It might be if the state was, you know, was coming from a particular city and some particular task is done. So I may have all of these different conditions that constitute this particular application event being generated, and then we'll show what that looks like in the journal. So this is something that's going to be that user context, or that business user context.
Think of this as sort of the translation layer I was talking about before. So far it's simple. You assign the name to the thing. This thing is a store. Think of it as a state store, right? So it's a state. There's a name to it. There's a trigger for that state existing, and then there's some, you know, free text and a condition for triggering that state, and there's some free text that we associate with it for journaling purposes and so on. But that is intended to convey the business semantics. Now I know that my implementers and a lot of implementers, when they first do this, they're going to put things in here like form attached. That's not what you're supposed to do. What you're supposed to do is explain it and distinguish between different kinds of form attachment or whatever, or document attachment.
So these are examples of the different types of application events that can be triggered based off of events that occur within the context of a process or occur within the context of a form or even in the context of a case. So these application events can be triggered lots of different ways. So now I'm just jumping gears. I'm looking over at an example of a form. This is just a way to be able to collect data or disseminate data to users as part of the process. But on here also, I'll have application events that are triggered based on different conditions. So, and one of the examples Scott had given was an application event, a good application event from the business perspective isn't something that says document attached. That has no context. What would have more context is a transcript attached, or correspondence, or letter of recommendation, something that has some meaning, but then additionally being able to take that business event and then also be able to drive logic around that, because that business event can also generate other business events, and that can also then drive characteristics or behaviors on what the user sees on the interface, as well as how the process is actually going to be controlled. So these are examples of how you would actually configure that, and we're going to show you in a minute what that kind of looks like. But these application events can be configured in lots of different places, because lots of different things can be occurring within the context of a case.
Are we going to dive into this one a little bit?
Oh yeah, so let me, here's an example. So this one, here's a couple on here, transcript added. So this is just an example just saying, I don't want to simply just say a document was added, I want to see it only if a document is attached and it was of type transcript. I may have an event on the particular form that we'll show in a moment that if the GPA is over 3.8, it's going to generate an event on the form, or generate an application event or a journal entry that indicates that it's a high GPA. So these are all just different application events here. There's another one that just says a meeting was requested. So these application events that are going to be generated, you're going to see in a moment, they can then be viewed in context by somebody through the journal viewer. So when they're configuring the journal viewer, when somebody has access to that, they're going to see things, either everything for the case, everything through my system, everything related to a process. They'll be able to be able to set the scope around that as well.
So when you're working inside the case, right, if my whole world were within this form, this wouldn't be, I mean, it'd still be a little useful, but it wouldn't be that useful, right? Because I can build conditions and show things in the form and stuff. That's not that interesting. But when I'm in it, but being able to create these events from a form or from, from the other objects in my system, excuse me, is because when I'm in a case and I'm looking at sort of the gestalt of, this case, all those little things, all those forms, that case might have, 200 forms attached to it and 15 different processes and, all kinds of things going on. All those little events that are getting generated, I can now roll them up. I can do smart things with them. I can base them on one another. So you think of it as sort of a semantic state machine almost. That's kind of parallel to this transactional state machine that, represents the workflow or the case.
And then something Bruce had mentioned is when we're talking about the application events being generated, they can be generated based on different types of events, but they can also be generated based on events themselves. So it's not necessarily hierarchical in that sense, but it does allow me to have, when a series of different events occur, that can turn around and generate other events. So those are all just events, like a step being completed. An application event being generated is very similar to that. So in this case, when these series of application events are generated, that's going to indicate this one is going to be fired, which is application is complete. That in turn could then turn around and do things like set case properties. So I may actually say here, I want to indicate that this case property is set not based off of simply just data somewhere, but now based off of this kind of a roll-up of context, these application events. So I might say here that I want to set this to, the application complete is going to be set to yes under some condition. And this particular condition is going to be based on the application event being fired called application is complete. So kind of an example of just how you can kind of use those to be able to drive process behaviors in the form, as well as even setting properties within a case or a form.
Right, now the case property, in this case, I'm going to reuse that word a lot. The case property is an example of this, is the state that we're talking about, right? So for a case, I mean, I can set any number of properties, so I can set any number of states depending on, the semantics for the particular, is it the caseworker, is it the manager, is it the customer, right, whatever. And again, it's really, the magic here is I'm collecting these from everywhere, I'm rolling them up. It doesn't matter necessarily when or where they happened, although I can test for that if that's, I can check for that as part of my conditions if that's important. What does matter is I know as soon as I sort of have accomplished these things in various places that I'm in this state.
So what I might do is jump over and just kind of show kind of what that looks like. So I'm going to just jump over to, I have something that I started filling out, and this is just a kind of a mock-up. I'm submitting an applicant form. I filled in some data here. The applicant's name is going to be Axel Adams, and filled in some other information. So I'm just going to go ahead and submit this. The submission of that, traditionally is going to start a process, and a bunch of different things are going to occur. It might be lots of other processes. In this particular case, a case instance is going to be created because there's a new applicant that is going to be going through the process. So now I'm kind of switching roles. I'm kind of at the admissions office. I'm looking at a list of the active applications. I can see I've got one here for this one I just submitted, this Axel Adams. I'm going to open it up. It's going to open up the case folder. This is just kind of again, a simple one just so I can demonstrate this. This is not typical of what somebody might see, but I wanted to be able to do this because it'll be easy for me to generate different types of events on one side of the screen and then have you see those inside of the journal on the left. So what you're seeing here on the left-hand side is the actual case journal. So this is showing me the application events that have been generated based on the scope that I've defined. So this is what a business user would see. So the business user is seeing things in the context of things that are meaningful to the business. These journals think of them as just the viewer. So they can exist in lots of different places. They can be roll-ups of things. They may be limited only to certain types of events or certain types of processes or cases, and they're collecting any of these. So I'm going to do an example here where I'm just going to say, somebody maybe requested a meeting. So I indicated on here, again, that probably happened completely asynchronously somewhere else, but they requested a meeting, and it's showing here application event was generated saying that a meeting was requested for that user at that particular time. I may also go through and I'm going to just do a couple of these where I'm going to compose a letter. I'm going to do a few things or create different types of events where these events are actually going to trigger different types of app events that we'll be able to see inside of the journal here in just a second. So in this particular case, I'm filling out correspondence. I'm going to just type in my notes. This is just showing also other parts or part of the depth of the product. As part of this particular process, it's going to pull, I believe in this case it's a Word template, it's filling some fields on there, it's creating a PDF, and ultimately what it's going to do is give me something that I can then turn around and email or print or whatever I needed to. So it took the information that I had plugged in there, created my file for me, and in this case I'm just going to indicate I'm done. I've either mailed it or however I needed to interface with that user. But what you'll see is an app event just appeared inside of my journal showing me that correspondence was sent to Axel, or on behalf of Axel Adams to this recipient, Sam Adams. And then as I'm going through here, different types of events will trigger things. I might also, in this case, for example, upload transcripts. And as I upload a transcript, what you're going to notice is it's not just indicating that a document was uploaded. What's important is it's actually context sensitive. So this happens to be a transcript, specifically a transcript that's being attached to this. Again, it wouldn't be attached like you're seeing here on the right-hand side, but this just makes it a little bit easier to demo. But what you're seeing is that generated this transcript, and additionally, that turned around and generated this other application event called Applications Complete, because that was the roll-up of all of the different events that occurred. So these are think of these as just a log of events that I can now even collaborate on.
Yeah, I mean, this is showing you a lot. And again, right, if this were all happening on one form, it wouldn't be that exciting, but it's happening, it might be happening in different countries or anything. So far what we're seeing is, the ability to roll those up, right? This was a roll-up of other states, right? As soon as those other states had been, kind of fulfilled or reached, then, we got this final state here or this particular state here. You also see that these are different kinds of notifications. They have different, they're related to different events. This journal, of course, because we're here for a demo, we're showing you all of them. But, with the journal, we can slice and dice them. So if we have, let's say we have a, correspondence manager or something, right? And all they want to see is everybody's correspondence. So, we can you can configure the journal to just show them those kinds of events from everywhere. Or we can configure the journal to just show, certain other groups of events or types, right? So there's a lot of ways that you can do the presentation of this, again, that's meaningful to the specific user. But in the logic, back in the transaction side, you have access to all of it, so you can develop your case in the way that makes the most sense from a business standpoint. Now we're going to talk a little bit about, using this as collaboration.
Yeah,
is that what we're doing?
Good.
Great.
Yeah, that's because as part of this, this is a collection of different events. But this also becomes that collaboration mechanism within the context of a case or whatever I'm doing. So on here, I can see that there was a meeting requested, and I'll say I'll make it or a note in here, or a comment in here saying I'll take this one. So now it also becomes a way to be able to thread a discussion, if you will, within the context of different types of business events. So you've got this journal, this entire history of whatever the process was, whatever the case was, as well as users being able to instantly be able to just go back and forth and collaborate with each other as well.
Anything else you want to show? I think
Well,
we covered it, right?
the only other, we were just talking about the different types of things that generate them, and you had touched on briefly just on the machine learning. The application events can obviously be generated based off of just static rules, but they can also be generated based off of our machine learning or ML definitions, which allow us to be able to then just look at large amount of data, make a decision, and then from that generate an app event. And again, those app events, those business rules, those ML definitions drive behavior of the process. They drive everything from where it goes, when something starts, who gets assigned something, even what somebody sees on the form. So I believe on this particular one, I've got this one. This one I think is set up so that if somebody is in, depending on, I think it's using a variety of different data on this form to be able to make a decision to determine is the user likely to drop out or the applicant likely to drop out within the first year. So I'm going to drop the GPA down to 3.8. And when I do, you'll notice on here that it's saying, high probability that there'll be a first year dropout based on the information that was collected here and based on historical information that was pulled from another system. I'm going to go ahead and change other information on here. I might say Arizona. So, but if they were coming from Arizona, that happens to actually change that, so likelihood of dropout is no. So this is just an example of where that decision, the result of that ML definition is changing something on the form, but that also couldn't be used, of course, to generate these application events.
Yeah, and like in a law school scenario, for example, one of the things that they'll want to know is this student likely to be competitive for other schools?
Yeah.
So that we should reach out to that student. I think it was in one of my slides, because we should reach out and do something special to make sure that they come to us instead of someone else. By the way, if you're listening Columbia, now's the time to do that. So so actually I'd like to open it for questions because I'm guessing there are going to be a few.
Yeah, so having the event-based driven system, looking at your application events and the conditionals there, if the conditional is requiring case properties that are populated by two different actions or tasks in there, how do you solve the chicken and egg problem? Do you have to duplicate that action event for both triggers that maybe those actions are firing off, or how is that done?
So help me understand. So let me make one comment to see if it does address your question, but if not, then please help me understand it better. One of the nice properties of this is the monodirectional data flow, right? So these things go from the conditions and the data to the event, to other events, and so on. So there's this there's not a problem where I'm feeding back, for example, because we'll detect that anyway if you try. So the data flow is monodirectional, but is that answering your question, or is that complete with?
Not necessarily. So say you have two actions, and one action populates case property A, and the other one populates case property B, but you only have one action defined on a trigger for action A that is required to have property B populated. Say the action B gets finished later on, is there any way to basically revert back to that trigger, to that action event process at that point?
You know what? I apologize. I'm not following. Could we talk after? Because
He wants to know if you have a blackboard of your events that you can enter it back.
Yeah, well, the events are constantly evaluated. So with the event, so when one of these happens, it doesn't have to be at
Right.
the occurrence of the event. So that's recorded.
I
So the
see.
detection of that may actually happen a minute later, an hour later, a month later. So it's not at the instant of the event.
yeah, think of it more as a state than an event. I mean, it's we call them events because we think they're like semantic events, but they're actually state.
The triggers component, which would, I assume, will trigger the evaluation.
Right. Well, anytime,
Yes.
right, so anytime that triggers,
So
no, it doesn't trigger the evaluation. The trigger's evaluated frequently, so independently. We're not saying evaluate this when, we're saying set this when, and then evaluating the trigger more or less continuously.
there are
Does that-
times
does
where
that answer?
you don't want to go back in history. And I want to say at this instant only, when this document is attached, for example, of this particular type, then that's when I want this condition to run. That's it. no other time. But then there's other times where you're going to say any time, like even later in the future, if I see that that document was attached, then I want to process something.
That clarifies.
Okay.
So what extent do you think this is, how would you imagine gathering this understanding from the customer, the system you're trying to deploy, to identifying all these things? I mean, if you kind of cooked up, from a technology standpoint, from a kind of modeling standpoint, it looks very elegant to me. Have you thought about how this would be sort of assembled, documented, implemented through some kind of interaction with the customer to get what these app events are?
Yeah, so we anticipate, I mean, this is obviously, this is BPM Next, right? This is new. We anticipate, though, that this is going to make those conversations a lot easier because, what you get, and that's the point in a way, what you get from your customer is, when the application is complete, we want, this to happen. And it's very difficult sometimes to get from them, well, what does that mean? And at the end of the day, the implementers in their heads kind of turn that, the application is complete to, we've reached this step here, and this thing happened, and this other thing happened, but there's not a good joining, there's not an obvious joining of that for the customer. So actually, in terms of professional services that we do and the building and things, we think this is just going to make things a lot more transparent because we're going to be able to show a customer, well, in one of these, in one of those, configuration, we're going to be able to say, look, this is what it means that the application is complete. Do you agree? Is that what that means? This thing happened, and this thing, and this thing, and this thing. So we think that makes it more transparent.
I think it would be useful to hear back maybe next year how successful this has been, because asking this to get a kind of event-driven understanding out of the plan is very different from trying to get a procedural kind of workflow orientation out of them. That's a different vocabulary, kind of a different set of asks, it seems to me. I'd be very interested to see what you find works in extracting this out. I don't doubt that it will be easier, but I think
Yeah.
it will create a different vocabulary.
Well, in particular with case, like I think, with traditional flow, with traditional flow, and by that I don't even mean, stuff process timeline does, but wasn't really created necessarily to do. Traditional flow things, yeah, if the customer's already, they've got a little flow chart or something and it shows what we do, great, but then in discussions we find out, well, this isn't really it. It's like, oh, you also have to have this magic knowledge here and this magic knowledge here. I think we're going to be capturing that magic knowledge, in these app events. And ask me next year. If I'm wrong, I'll tell you, because we'll change it, Sir?
Have you thought at all about whether there is a role for citizen developers in this? That jargon of letting the end users build their own journals? I mean, it looks very easy and intuitive, but I'm just wondering whether you think about that. Being able to build these things on the fly seems very attractive.
Yeah, so at the moment, journals are configured just like the rest of the implementation, and you can do them by role or make them available any way you want. We don't do yet like here create your own journal because I'm not sure we've given them the tools yet for that, like just in terms of understanding what these things are necessarily at that layer. And I'm also, personally not convinced that that's a layer that is as big a deal as some think, the citizen developer thing. It's certainly out there, but I'm not sure the extent to which, that's a big deal. So we're figuring that stuff out as we go along. But yeah, that's something we are thinking about. One of the questions I was expecting didn't get asked yet. Anybody know what it is? I'm way ahead of you guys. What is that? No, so on that point, like the other thing though is like Slack integration for this and those kinds of things. Like that's really next for these. It just makes sense.
You could take that journal and put it into Slack rather than putting it in your own instead. Taking the data.
Well, in addition.
Taking the journal,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah.
Of course. But taking the journal to them rather than making them come to you.
Yeah, and it gives you a whole different way to do notifications too and alerts, because again, alerts now are usually built on, is this late, right, or is this wrong or something, and now we can do, much more sophisticated notification, or at least we can do it more transparently. I guess technically we could do those in some way before too, but now sort of more easily and transparently and kind of, we have a tool set for saying, oh yeah, all these different things have happened, notify somebody. That was easy to do in a workflow context or in a form context, very, very difficult to do in a broader context. Good?
Yeah, the journal is a journal, but you've also got sort of state indications there. Is there a way to, or have you been asked to, like the last item that enters in there, maybe now is the only one that's important? So does anybody say, well, it'd be nice if all the other ones got hidden as soon as that one enters, just because the eye tends to read them all. I get notification all the other notification all day long. And now, since that's a state indication, maybe I only care about that because it's done. You know, somebody put up a bug, we don't think the student should be admitted, but then they get admitted, so I still really
Right.
see it on the state.
Right, so the way that the way that works today is you simply have you configure a journal that doesn't show this other stuff.
And then you conditionally display the journal that you want based on an event. And if that, or based on a condition. So if that condition of the application is complete is there, then you'd display one journal. You'd automatically display one journal over the other. So the journal themselves define what information they want to be able to see. But those also the journal itself can be conditionally displayed, which one you want to use.
And those go anywhere. So you're seeing it here on a dashboard. You can stick them on a form. You can, I don't know, I'm sure other stuff, iframes. Is that it?
So it's not really relevant to this particular case.
Sure, keep everyone from lunch then.
It's incredible how it's possible to avoid that word. One of the things we're doing as well is trying to translate technical events into business events, but in a probabilistic way. Think
Yeah.
about your bank customer, you have a whole bunch of transactions in a series of foreign countries. You could be me, or you could have stolen my identity.
Yeah.
Is that the sort of stuff that you guys are looking at as well?
Yeah, well, when combined with the ML, which we didn't really talk about today, and it's not really the topic, but I was watching yours now, even though you're the presentation ahead of me, so my head's really already in mine. Yeah, there's that thinking is there. The ML's there. These events can be absolutely be probabilistic, and yeah, absolutely. Denis?
Just a comment or a question at the same time. When you went back to the meeting request, so you went back into the context of that case, is that information added to the case? And can that information reopen the case?
So,
So
Yeah.
in the context, so the journal is showing me a timeline of event condition actions
right.
that have happened. And then I go back into that timeline like you did there, and I'm adding new facts. So think of it, this is a police investigation, we close the case,
Right.
and suddenly a new
Yeah, no.
fact comes in.
Yeah, that's where this is that is exactly where this is great, because ultimately, in case, like the number one thing you're going to do based on these probably, at least our expectation is start setting case properties, including is it, under investigation or closed or whatever, is the student accepted or rejected. I have a story about it. So earlier this year, I got an acceptance letter from the University of California Irvine Law School. I was accepted to the UCI Law School. That's interesting because I had not applied to the UC Irvine Law School. My son had, but it wasn't for him either, although fortunately he did eventually get accepted. And I forget now why I'm telling that story, but it has to do with that. That's a situation where they may have wanted to go back after that, and it turns out they'd send it to donors and stuff. They may want to go back after that and mark that case closed instead, mark me not accepted rather than accepted. So yeah, those kinds of events, that's exactly what you do with this. And it can completely change the way your case works. And again, we're not just talking about launching things or stopping them. We're talking about subtle influences in the decisions they make and what you see on a form and, literally anywhere.
And I'm assuming you have a way to contextualize or scope these things, like in CNN we use the notion of a stage, which is to contextualize a series of those. If you haven't, it's probably going to come up as something unique, is that within the context of the bigger case, you may want to have sub-context of things that may happen in that sub-context.
We do, yeah, there's multiple contexts. Yeah. Yeah, for us, the context sort of I can tell you more about that, but yes, there are multiple layers of context. So if you can think of it as sort of category type context, there's like multiple layers of this you can slice and dice. And again, the journal is awesome, but it's the view of this thing. The actual state is, what's behind that. I feel like I'm keeping you from lunch, so we'll be here for lunch if you have more questions, and I appreciate your attention. I'm sorry that the slideshow no longer gives me time to tell a joke or let you get a muffin at the beginning like in the old days, but maybe we'll, I'll add a slide, 2 slides for that next year. All right, thanks everyone. Have a good lunch.
Scott, Joby, thank you.